Hello and welcome back to Parley, my on-the-spot responses to the prompts you folks submit. This one is from True Parley Grandmaster Foot. Hope you'll enjoy listening. It's about the art of intentional boredom and forced introspection in video games. It's time for the final arc in the Invisible Wall series, Mr. Foot's series of Parley about the frontiers of video game design. The next two episodes will deal with the concept of why we bounce off of some pieces of art and what we can do about it. Because, enterprising you might be, there are some things you can do about that. Beginning with the very assertively titled, I Love Boredom. In today's world, there is so much noise from everywhere, and with the entirety of the internet at our fingertips, there's no need to ever be bored. But we'll come back to that. But I found that taking some time to actively bore myself, when it's convenient, is great for every aspect of my life. I love to wait for the bus without looking at my phone, to take a walk without headphones, and to use those 10 minutes in the waiting room for nothing. It gives my mind some time to slow down and subconsciously process what is going on in my life. I genuinely love boredom. But this love is hard to depict in art. What an opening paragraph for a parlay. Two excellent points in here. So the first one is why it is good to have moments of quiet in a person's life. We'll unpack that a bit. And then it is hard to add those moments into some art forms. That's a very interesting premise. I agree with you. I hadn't really thought of it that way before. Right. Those moments in life where meaning is kind of organically created by you having a beat between events, if you allow those beats to exist. And a variety of things happen. You said one of them. The subconscious mind is able to kind of process and keep going. And this is how humans internalize meaning, by having a time for that. This is a proposed reason for sleep as well, but it is certainly something that you do when you're just sitting around. You are still doing something. Your brain is still working. It's internalizing meaning from short to medium term memory, at least as far as I understand. But there's also things that happen emergently. Things feel appropriate or timely in life. And these little moments in life can be very beautiful and often lead to the topic of a short story, for example, a painting. And these moments happen organically. How do you put them into some art forms? You can imagine if you have a painting and you put it in a gallery, when people go to the gallery, they are kind of set up for a moment like that. It's generally accepted you're meant to be quiet in the gallery, and people will go there kind of intending to spend some time just looking at paintings. So you can imagine how this type of feeling, if it was intended by the painter, is very achievable in that setting most of the time, especially if you go to like small independent galleries and not big museums. I'm not saying big museums are then bad, just to say I think there is a different appeal to those smaller galleries. If you have not, highly recommended, and it's often free to enter them. So, check, ask, but just walk in and you might have a very nice time for a few minutes. That can be enjoyable, especially if it's like if you have a commute, like if it's on your route, it could be a nice moment in between your day. Just as an example, you can see how that's maybe not that hard for something like painting or, whatever physical medium you like to draw a picture. But in a video game, well, it's not completely at odds with doing that, because you often sit in your room alone or like in the quiet of the night or something and play the game. But a lot of people don't go to games looking for that. And then there's also the issue of gameplay. So there's a couple of problems that I can think of off the top of my head anyway, with including that in video games. And other art forms, you can imagine it would be a problem too. Music, it's sort of doing it a different way. If music is trying to create this feeling, it's like the music needs to be chill enough to leave enough mental bandwidth for you to have these feelings. Like, that's kind of tricky as well. Before we move on, I just wanted to quickly say that I think it is worth unpacking somewhat this feeling about I feel like the audience feels quite called out. I don't know your life, but I feel like a lot of people do with that first paragraph, Mr. Foot. And I wanted to say that I think it's worth briefly defining how you're using boredom here. And I also want to say something about the the decompressing and the boredom. So the boredom you're describing, I would describe more as like a lack of sensory input, or like turning down the volume of the sensory input enough. Not there. I feel like the common use of boredom often means you genuinely feel there is a lack of relevant things to do, like meaningful or relevant things to do. That is gone forever. If you genuinely think that there's no good entertainment or like nothing worth doing in life, I feel bad that you feel that way. There definitely are lots of those things. I'm very confident that I could find them. Private message me on Discord. I'll hook you up with lifetimes of good entertainment, a lot of which can be easily found free. I can think of books and video games and shows that I feel are quite clearly worth one's time. There's no lack of that stuff. So that idea of boredom, a lack of genuine entertainment, I don't understand. I mean, I understand where it might come from in principle, but it's not real. Like, there is enough of that. I'm not accusing people of doing something wrong if they feel that way. I'm just trying to reassure you, you definitely can no longer feel that way. That's easy to overcome. We can do that. That's a significant point of the reason I'm doing the thing I'm doing for a living. I feel I can help with this subject. However, I would argue that the way you're using boredom here is meaningfully different. It's like a lack of sensory input, which I think is a reasonable use of boredom. I'm not trying to nitpick that idea of the term. I just think it's useful to separate out a little bit, because I think a lot of people get led astray with having quiet time in their life, thinking that it's meant to be like there's something noble about just spending time doing nothing. When for many people, the reason they are scrolling is a sort of misguided, I don't mean to offend people, but it's not going to be a good way to find this, but a misguided search for meaning, a lack of stuff that is entertaining. Things don't feel coherent enough. They don't feel like they connect enough into a narrative. You know, if you go on a walk, like you go on a hike, for example, there's a way in which, because you just see the whole process from start to finish, there's an organic satisfaction to that in the brain, where point A led to point B, led to point C, led to in this like medium term event that took 30 minutes to an hour or whatever. Whereas the scrolling, and especially the content of a lot of shorts, is such that it's decoherent. It doesn't lead to any meaning forming in the brain significantly enough, I think. And I believe it is that people are looking for. Now, YouTube Shorts can do that. It's not like not possible for them to do that. There are some that do, but certainly the majority of that medium and the things people are scrolling through seem to me, as someone who doesn't really do this, but I have obviously seen it before, don't seem to construct meaning. And in fact, I feel like you can kind of see this in the comments of these videos. If you look at the comments of a lot of these shorts, they will say things to the effect of, this is what YouTube was made for, or finally, a video that doesn't have distracting music in the background, or whatever. I would argue that those comments are evidence that what people are saying is, I finally found meaning. There's finally something that means something coherent and is something in my life. Thank you. And they often say thank you. And those comments can be surprisingly consistent as well. Now, they don't really make that much sense. Like, I feel like there's a lot of videos that do like the thing YouTube is meant for, if that's what that is. / that doesn't entirely make sense. Like, it is often still just a random video, but I think they're saying thank you for a coherent experience as I am scrolling. And I'm not trying to victim blame, but obviously one of the solutions would be to try to not do the scrolling, you don't have to not watch something. You can watch something, but just that isn't short. Like that's it. I honestly think that would be very helpful for a lot of people. And I'm sad that the world isn't moving that quickly toward that direction of fixing this, because I feel like a lot of people think that it just makes them sort of cosmically nobler or better to sit and quietly appreciate things. It doesn't. You don't get any like Cosmo points for being like a philosophically more grounded person or whatever. The reason to do it is because it's pleasant. Like, Mr. Food and I aren't saying that we better ourselves by doing this. We like to do it. It is enjoyable to do. And not always. I would say maybe about half of the time that I go for a hike, I don't listen to music, and the other half, what I like to do is listen to music. And some of the time that I choose to listen to music, the reason is that I have spent too much time chewing on my own thoughts, and I'm now exhausted of that. And it's healthy to give yourself a break too. I know that's a problem very few people have, and in a way I'm very privileged to have that issue. It's partly because of Parley, actually. Obviously, I get a lot of time to chew on my own ideas here, and plenty of quiet time to just sit with my feelings. And so sometimes I think it's good to not over indulge, if you like, in that type of thing. This is important because I think that it constructs why it would be good or how you can create a moment like this in games. I also just, obviously it's a significant topic, and forgive me, I think that most of the potential audience for these types of videos probably doesn't have a lot of context for what is good about this form of boredom. And so I feel like it is kind of needed to unpack that. This is also a pretty compact parlay, well, for one of yours, Mr. Foot, which are often like an essay. And so I think we have time as well. Let's read through most of the rest of the prompt, and then we will get back to some of those. I think you're going to see those coming up. Anyway, an excellent point to start the parlay. 2 points, really. You said that you think it's good to kind of decompress from this overstimulation and give the mind time to unpack. You even specified why that's good. It's not just a cosmically good thing. Those don't exist. The reason it's good, and things can only be good for reasons, is that it gives you time to unpack your thoughts. I think there can be other reasons it can be good too. But I don't think that the thing that people have with the entirety of the internet at their fingertips is a lack of being bored. We do have that, but I don't think that the internet and the scrolling being at one's fingertips is that exactly. And then the line that for some art forms, it's very difficult to depict that lack of input and the brain's ability to just sit and stew over things. So an example. Playing with emptiness. In the first chapter of Death Stranding, our protagonist Sam reunites with his dying, estranged mother. That's not quite accurate. They reconnect in a physical sense, but there's no emotional connection there. This is further complicated because Sam's mother, Bridget, gives him a mission as her final wish. Before Sam has time to process any of this, Bridget dies and has to be cremated outside the city as dictated by the rules of the setting. Despite everything, it is Sam's task to carry his mother's corpse up a mountain where the crematorium lies. At this point, we'll talk about mechanics. Death Stranding has little moment-to-moment gameplay. What you do for 95% of the time is walking from point A to point B. You should try to stay on even ground and balance out your cargo so you don't fall over. You are constantly evaluating which path you want to take forward, considering the cost of the short and risky path versus the long and safe one. That being said, there is a lot of downtime in this game. You often walk for minutes on end while nothing worth mentioning happens. Aside from the occasional curse word or grunt, there's no dialogue from Sam. In other words, the game gives you a lot of time to be bored, in that sense of boredom, the sort of lack of over-sensory stimulation and coherence of experiences, and that is by design. So there we are in the first hour of the game, carrying a corpse up a mountain. Corpses are the most annoying type of cargo there is. That's one of the sentences of all time. They sway a lot, and you spend a ton of time stumbling and slowing down to balance yourself. What is this? Even more so in the beginning of the game, where we're still unfamiliar with the mechanics. And just as we start to get used to this system, a song comes up, Bones by the artist Low Roar, linked in the description. It's a song about a failed relationship and the acceptance that, while the relationship may be over, you may never fully get rid of the impact that person had on you. Long story short, the gameplay, the song, its lyrics, the metaphor of carrying a literal corpse up a mountain, it all comes together in a beautifully synesthetic moment. And this is not the reason I'd like to talk about this moment. The reason is what comes after, or rather, what doesn't. The song ends, and you're back to the minimalistic, and I dare say boring, gameplay. You're left reflecting on this moment. And that is in essence the trick of Death Stranding. big emotionally charged moments punctuated by long stretches of minimalism where you're left to reflect on the game and how you feel about it. Death Stranding is not the only game that experiments with intentional boredom. Davey Wreden's newest game is called Wanderstop. Yes, Davey Wreden, creator of both the Stanley Parable and the Beginner's Guide. Oh. And it's about running a fantasy tea shop. But you often have no customers and other tasks, and there's no time limit for the tasks that you do have. So you can spend your time wandering around, tending to the gardens, or experimenting with fantasy tea. On a deeper level, it's a game about introspection and about dealing with shit that happens in your life. A game that forces introspection both for you, the protagonist, and you, the player. And interestingly, the way the game communicates that idea is via the method of intentional boredom. It's almost as if these games were a kind of bizarrely guided meditation. Very interesting way to discuss the subject. So 2 really good examples, and I think they're meaningfully different examples as well. Yes, obviously, having skimmed this parlay before this, I wrote I had intended the connection where Death Stranding has you just go on a walk, and there's this moment of coherence. I want to briefly deconstruct what the ingredients for those moments are. Part of the point of this parlay is to discuss where these moments come from, to not say, I liked or didn't like Death Stranding, because no offense, you're allowed to have had that experience, but it just doesn't matter or is significant at all. Those things were caused. There was a cause for that experience, and we can know what that cause is. It is possible to map how those experiences were constructed. I think a lot of people, when doing this, will not find the right answer, like identify the thing that caused them to like it. Like, that can be very challenging, but it is possible, and therefore it is replicable. We could even construct the ingredients with which one is able to enjoy that experience, and then confirm that it has been constructed in a piece of media. And then if you've got this, the ingredients to enjoy that experience, and that the piece is constructed in a piece of media, you can have the experience. Simple as that. Well, it's not simple at all. That's why people don't think you can do this. People think that you just don't get a piece of media. That is wrong, I think, verifiably, but it's not that reductive to say that, because it is challenging to construct that situation. But we're going to do so here. So, using the Death Stranding example, what are the pieces of this experience? I would say there's 4, maybe. The first one is context. There is a scenario. Sam reconnects with his dying mother. Then there's a break, so you move on from that situation. Sam's mother dies, and he carries her up the mountain. Then along the moving on part, a coherent segment of the game after that, connected to that, where you can see things going from point A to point B to point C, to etc. You literally go on a walk to cremate your mother. Something happens, something that is initially a little sideways to the experience you've had. And that thing creates resonance, is the term I'm going to use for it. The song isn't directly about your mom dying. It's about like a human relationship breaking. At least that was my interpretation when I listened to it. And this is meant to resonate with the idea that obviously you had a relevant life experience recently. But note that it's not the exact same form. It's a song this time, not basically a short movie, the cutscenes in Death Stranding in general. And it's also not exactly about that. There's a moment where you lightly synthesize. It's not a very big leap to interpret that Low Roar, the Bones by Low Roar, is a song that is about the thing in the game. Like, I think most people will read that subtext. It's not much subtext. But you do still have to do a moment of synthesis. I think that's meaningful. And then, the fourth important ingredient, after that moment of resonance happens, there is a decompression moment where you get to kind of digest or chew, and the thing moves into emotional memory storage. And again, perhaps medium term neuroscientists help me out, memory storage. So context, sort of continuation, a moment of resonance, and then decompression. That's what I'm going to describe it as anyway. Okay, so those are the pieces that need to be in the game in this case for that to exist. Now, just quickly note, let's say you do my art gallery example from before, are those pieces there? So there's context. You know you were going to an art gallery after whatever happened in your day. I would say that's the context. Or being out on the street before you go into the gallery. Anyway, that part's slightly up for interpretation. Your life up until that point, okay, is the context. I think fair enough, but that part's arguable. You could argue video games are maybe a little stronger at that, or like a movie could be a little stronger at that. You have a moment of continuation, you go into the gallery, and now this is a new part of your life, and you're exploring a new space. Again, very point A to point B to point C. You can see where you're going. It's a very coherent, easy experience for the brain, and you're just exploring, and this should be a soft focus, relaxing moment. You see a painting, well, probably a few paintings, and then one of them will create a resonance. In paintings, for the average painting enjoyer, the average human looking at a painting, probably the resonance is a little bit more of a cognitive leap for it to relate to the rest of your life. And I do think this is a weakness, if you want to say it that way, about painting, but it is what a lot of people enjoy. For a lot of people, it just being that something sad happened to you, and then that thing is directly echoed, might not be that resonant. You might feel like, yeah, I know. And there's this weird phenomenon where it can feel too obvious. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. I feel like that's a very mysterious thing about human emotions. Anyway, paintings, maybe the resonance is a flavor that is relatively indirect, but certainly you could see a painting of, I don't know, there's a painting that sticks in my mind right now that I saw recently that is of like a ship on extremely turbulent, very vertical waves in like a storm, but you can see the storm breaking on the horizon. And there's this mood to the painting, at least to me, where you know that the opening in the storm is there. You can see the edge of the storm. You can see that there's a way out of the storm. But the emphasis of the image is on the massiveness of the waves, not on the fact that there's like a light at the end of the tunnel. And I related to that a lot. It's just not that relevant to me to know that like this will get better. That's not bad advice. I don't think it's silly that people think that. That just at this moment in my life, that is obvious and not what I need to hear. And it was kind of resonant to me to see, yeah, I mean, you can also see how hard it's going to be to get out. And I appreciated that. That meant something to me. So, okay, a moment of resonance. I'm just trying to give you some example of some kind. If you've never really felt this from a painting before, that's completely fine. You use whatever mode you want. And then a decompression. You're still in the art gallery. You're now probably more aware that it is hopefully pretty quiet in the art gallery, and you have time to kind of mentally decompress from that image. So I would argue these are the things that construct that meaning. Now, what are the human ingredients needed to kind of hook up with that experience? We're going to come back to that. And we're going to come back to it using this example from the second game you mentioned, from Wanderstop. So how is this a little bit different? Well, Death Stranding seems more linear. I haven't played Death Stranding, by the way. I've just seen I have enough context to understand what you mean, but I haven't played Death Stranding a meaningful amount. I have touched the game before, but that doesn't mean much. And then Wanderstop sounds to me like a game. It's like a management kind of game is what you're describing. And so perhaps it's a game where you can kind of budget these things more. Because the critical thing about that model I demonstrated is that context ingredient. A game could be linear and include the context. Or it could be more nonlinear, more open, and have it be that the player is meant to kind of do a certain type of action when they come to the game with a certain context. That this is where we're getting into a kind of gray area where the game can support that. For example, the player is feeling more chill. What kind of chill activity does the game offer for this part of your slice of life fantasy cafe simulator? And does that activity then construct the rest of this moment of meaning? That can be part of the game, but obviously that's also significantly part of the player. Does the player have these moments? Does the player play the game in moments where they can enjoy this kind of stuff? There are a lot of people who play games that are more relaxed in times in their life when they're just overwhelmed, and that's not bad. It's great that the game is serving that purpose, but it may be that the player is too shell-shocked from the moments in their life to easily access this type of meaning, and it's good to just have something to move. I have to say, I personally think that other activities in life are an even better fit for that kind of thing, like cooking, for example, can be a nice, once you're used to cooking something simple or like making a pasta dish, it's easy enough that that makes a nice activity for that kind of thing. But certainly video games can do that just fine as well. We're going to come back to that in just a minute. So we're on our way to constructing this way that the player needs certain qualities to use this kind of runway to create meaning that can be in the game. And the thing I want you to keep in mind for that section is there is a gray area where it's not entirely clear or definable whether a quality needs to be from the game or from the player. It is to an extent up to interpretation whether some of those things actually are from the game or whether they're from the player. Complexities. Nice. It's almost like I plan these. There's a reason why people avoid boredom in our day-to-day lives. In moments of silence, unprocessed emotions bubble up, and we're forced to deal with them. In today's world, we're conditioned to avoid this silence via our many vices, video games being one of them. If you're not prepared for the introspective games, you'll feel betrayed and maybe even angry for the game not fulfilling its role as a distraction. People have criticized Death Stranding for being boring, and I don't disagree with them. That is kind of the point of the game after all. But selling it on the premise of boredom is nigh on impossible. Lots of people say that the game's marketing lied to them, and I see where they're coming from. I think that's one of the strongest complaints with Death Stranding. The marketing doesn't just not advertise boredom, it advertises almost the opposite of what the game actually is, I feel. That is bad. That is not good. It's obvious why they did it, but that's bad. That was dishonest. But there's also a strange phenomenon with Death Stranding. A large number of people feel a strong urge to replay it, or give it another go, despite them hating it on the first go-round. And for no reason, well, obviously there's a reason, no clear reason, they suddenly enjoy it, and their criticisms don't disappear. They just find a way to jam with the game, engage with it in a way that works. Dunkey is a famous example of this happening. Yes, very funny. If you look up Dunkey's Death Stranding dunk view, and then a video called Revisiting Death Stranding, I'll just link them in the description. You linked them for me, but I've watched these before. Yes, it's very interesting. He is a style of critic that is a little far from Parley. He's definitely going for this was my subjective experience, but then maybe I don't make it entirely clear that that isn't just what I think is objectively true of the game. But then it's really interesting how he comes back to it, and none of those complaints have really changed. But as he puts it, now I have 3 completed save files. I don't really know what happened exactly. Again, going back to my premise before, this is something where I'm not trying to claim that it is trivial to figure out what that cause was, just that it is possible to find it. It is physically possible to know the cause. It does exist. There is a cause, and it's not impossible to find. It might be impractical to find every single time, but there remains value in trying to map out, okay, but there was a reason that that worked. What was it? That is knowable. And if you knew it, and you sometimes will be able to know this, you can use that information. You can use it to enjoy something that you otherwise wouldn't have enjoyed. Mr. Fruit continues and finishes, I'm not saying that Death Stranding is a masterpiece and people were too stupid to get it. We're saying pretty much the opposite of that. What I'm trying to say is that there's some mechanism that leads people to enjoy the game, while others hated it. The phenomenon of you being drawn to some piece of media you disliked just to find yourself enjoying it under different circumstances is fascinating to me, right? What a weird thing. This intentional boredom is an explanation as to why these games work for some people and not for others, but I don't think this is the full story for this and all the other media you just don't get. And we'll talk about it in the other half of the story in the next episode. Sure, so we won't go all the way. I'll try to finish the thoughts we were on for this one. Right. I think that that's an interesting thing. I mean, from what we've set up so far, this idea that people would be kind of magnetized to an experience that they kind of initially disliked seems, I feel like there's one fairly obvious explanation. It's something that they benefited from mentally, but they don't consciously like it, or they can't point to any reason that they enjoy it. I think that some people don't appreciate how big of a deal this can be sometimes. It can be very difficult to explain the real reason that exists. That is the reason why you liked a thing. And that can make it hard to enjoy the thing. Not being able to say, there is a reason I like this. I believe in cause and effect. Reality is causal. There is a reason why I didn't like it. And a lot of people who say they just don't get it or whatever do basically believe this is true. Like if you were to ask them, they would say, well, sure, there's a reason, but I just don't know what it is. But in passing would say it like that. Just not being able to say what that reason is can make it hard to enjoy it. The brain lacks a way to rationalize or find consonance with enjoying the experience if there's all these objective feeling reasons why it was bad. You just walk around. What did I even do with all my time? I lost my free time to this boring game. That's sort of true. And so if you don't have any logical way to explain what the benefit was instead, that can make it hard to enjoy the game. I think that's a very important point. It's not just that it might be hard to figure out what the reason why you're enjoying it is. Not knowing that reason actually makes it more difficult to enjoy it, in my opinion. I know that might seem weird. You might disagree, and I might be wrong, but currently that's what I think. So we have reasons in this parlay. I mean, one of them is you got to decompress. If you get time to just be quiet and relax, I've noticed an interesting phenomenon, which is that most people that need this do like it when it's given to them. The thing is, they don't pursue it as much as other people do. They don't dislike it when it comes up a lot of the time. I'm sure some people do, but a lot of people don't. They're happy when it happens. They just don't invite it as often into their life. So imagine if one of those people played Death Stranding, let's say, or the Wanderstop, that cafe simulator. And they have some time where, with the arguments they have access to, they can't really reconcile why they enjoy the game. They think, well, it wasn't really fun in any way that I have words for. And if I tell people what I spent my weekend on, I think this is a huge one. Maybe I'm overestimating it. It infuriates me. Maybe I'm overestimating this. But when I tell other people what I did, I can't like say I did anything. I just played a walking simulator. That will seem lame to them, as if that matters, by the way. Like, okay, who cares? But I think people do care about that. So I can't really reconcile that I enjoyed it. And yet, there might have been some positive effect, probably a quite semi-conscious or subconscious effect. And that decompression will have felt good, even though there isn't clear rhetoric for why. My hypothesis here is that that then makes it take a while for the enjoyment of the game, such as it is, to synthesize. And it takes people a while to get back around to the point where they go, I have a weird urge to play this. Like, that's so odd. In fact, my sister's boyfriend just told me this exact thing the last time we visited. I said, hey, you still playing Death Stranding? And he went, yeah, with a voice that tells you just about all you need to know. And we talked about it a little bit. I mentioned the dunkey example, and he said, yes, that exact thing happened to me. How odd. You know, that's strange. I've often found with slice of lifey or character driven pieces of media that I tend to enjoy them more later as life goes on. A piece of media I thought was okay, but maybe I thought was a bit dry, or I didn't have words for it at the time, I now identify as, well, there's plenty going on. It's a very character focused piece. And I'm just, I guess, ready for that now or at this period of my life. And therefore I've enjoyed them. Or I've read books where I think I enjoyed this on the first try, but I would not have in the past. Like, that wouldn't have been something I liked. I actually have something I'm planning to reread, the very first epic fantasy series that I read, which was The Black Company. Some people might be familiar. That's a relatively famous one, which I read when I was like in my young teens and thought was impressive writing, but then bounced off of. I have been wondering for a long time if that was what was going on there. And I have all, well, I don't know if that's all 10 books. I have 10 of the books in that series. I don't really know, that I have from my childhood that I've been planning to reread for a while. So this will be a place where I'll get to see that. Was this what was going on? I just kind of wasn't really ready for that and didn't have the language to express it. But now I think I've enjoyed media like that if it's going to be like that. So I don't think I'm going to, that sounds good. Like, I feel like I will enjoy that. I expect to like them now more than I did in the past because I didn't finish them when I was younger. I read like the first three. Anyway, so I think that that is part of what's going on. I think that not having a reason, not being able to say, maybe it lets the brain decompress, makes it harder to enjoy this. And I think that that's understandable. I mean, what is happening when the brain gets to decompress? You know what I mean? Neuroscientifically, I don't know. I don't know. I can say that I don't think it's that subconscious of a feeling, and I have scrutinized this a lot in my life because I spend a lot of time doing it. What is the benefit? What am I doing here? I do think that part of it is just mentally chewing, is just letting the ideas kind of sit for a bit. This is that old thing about your first idea not being your best. And so if you give it some time to chew, I think a lot of people just don't have faith that they will have more thoughts. You will, I promise you will, and they will often be better thoughts. They'll be more interesting thoughts. It is a great joy to be doing things in your life that are a response to non-basic, non-responsive thoughts that you had to a thing in your life. Something happens to you, you have a reaction to it, you go beyond that reaction, and then you do something in your life that is based on or responding to the thoughts beyond the reaction to the thing that you did before. That is a wonderful feeling. I read a piece of work, I thought it was really amazing writing, that was intimidating to me as somebody who wants to write myself. I sat with that for a bit. Why did I find that way? Isn't my writing going to be good in some different way? What do I even want out of writing? Do I want to be better than that person? Wouldn't it be kind of wonderful to write something that is good and fun, but that just is worse than what the other person wrote? And I set out to find myself quite attached to the idea of writing something bad, just bad. Because who cares? It's fine. And I have a genuine excitement for that now. That, you see what I mean? That is a non-direct reaction to the thought I had. I kind of coalesced that. That doesn't really make sense directly from my personality. I guess it probably does, but from the experience I had. I was intimidated by a writer that I think is better than me in some, whatever the hell that means, by the way. And my response was, I want to write more. It kind of doesn't make sense. And I want to write something bad more. Also doesn't make sense. But what a delightful experience. Like, I don't know. That's bizarre. I understand that's weird. But that's sort of what I enjoyed about that. Again, I'm sorry for using examples from me. This is what I have. And they're random, janky examples, I understand. Just that it's an example of what is happening in these moments. What do you get out of those moments? Your personality. I think that, like, without any holds barred, that is the sum total of, to be a person, you need these moments. That is when you are born at a given time, and you die after several days or one day or a few weeks or months or years of being that person, and then are reincarnated during these moments of you being quiet, if that is an aggressive enough way to word it, as a constant procession of people, which you are. The stage where you are created is when you have these moments of digesting something. Otherwise, it's fairly obvious what the single reaction to, reading a really good book would be. Awe or admiration or confusion. And that's it. And I just don't, life is more than that. Like, there's more to enjoy than that. There's more in there than that. It's fun for the things not to be that simple. You can get things out of that. I don't know. Again, I'm just trying desperately, perhaps poorly, in vain, to express what the benefit, what you get out of exploring these ideas is. So now let's go back a little bit and try to bring it home by saying what the audience needs to be willing to hook up to this kind of runway of game design. Because I think one of the key points here is that it's very difficult to argue that these games are about this in a meaningful way. Let's go to Death Stranding, for example. We can argue, analyzing the game's design, that it is intentional in the sense that the game does contain all the pieces for that meaning to be formed, and they were obviously put there, like, on purpose, right? The song was put there because it's a song that relates to the experience Sam had, obviously. The song triggers at a point in the game that is timed like enough away, but not too far away from the moment with Sam and his mom, because they want you to have an experience like what Mr. Food is describing. That's not easily up for debate, in my opinion. I feel like fairly obviously they like that. Yes, the game is about that. However, I do personally think that getting caught up on intent, meaning Hideo Kojima is specifically intending you to do the 2 pages of this parlay, like that just doesn't, we can't ever know that, and it doesn't matter. That's a point at which the audience is now a significant shareholder in this transaction. The audience is doing, I'm going to argue, more of the heavy lifting of that happening at that point. Again, there's a subtle distinction here. The game can be said to be objectively about having that type of experience, and that can make sense, but I don't think that it makes sense to go further and say that the game then intends for you to have that type of experience specifically, and that matters. It just, we can't ultimately know that, and it doesn't matter. The audience bringing that to the game is an important ingredient, a necessary ingredient, and we can't really ever extricate that. It's always going to be that these games need to have some credit given to the audience that they're playing, because the audience is bringing some of the materials, some of the context, for example, and some of the mood that they're going to be in when they play the game, some of the organization for when they play which part of the game. When they play Wanderstop, they're going to think about what part of the game's activities they're going to do, and they're going to need to choose that in a way that has synergy with the experience the game wants you to feel. The audience is part of that creation, and so we can say that the game's design sets that up, but I think it's worth not going further to say that then that means that is the correct version of the game, or like what the game is about. Therefore, I believe there's kind of a problem. Any part of the game that is going to create these experiences will also at times not create these experiences, and you can't ever change that, according to me. You can't ever have it be that the audience will always bring those materials and complete that part of the game. And you can't just say, well, that's what the developers intended, therefore any audience member that doesn't bring those things is just doing it wrong. I just don't think that, I feel that's pedantic. I feel like that doesn't really matter. The audience cannot possibly ever always bring the mindset they need to have an experience like that. That is impossible, according to me. You could probably, if you set your mind to it, hardly ever play a game when you're not in the mindset to have an experience like that. But let me ask you, if you go have a quiet night on the beach every day for the rest of the year, can you tell me which of those nights you will have a moment of emotional pathos? I didn't think so. And so it's not practical to say that the game is then not being played correctly if you don't do this. Like with many forms of meaning, I think that the more helpful model is to say the game does contain the ingredients for that, and there's not much point to those ingredients unless you bring this mindset. So Death Stranding's value is significantly wrapped up in the audience's perspective. So we've got that model, the game has to set up a ramp for these experiences, and the player needs to have, we've brought it into focus, a perspective that allows them to access the value of those experiences more or less. It's not really a binary, yes or no, not really, more or less often. If you can enjoy Death Stranding's setup enough, not 100% of the time, that's impossible, and not never, you probably won't enjoy the game in that case. If you can access it enough, you will probably enjoy the game. And that is, now that we've spent 45 minutes talking about it, a relatively objectifiable thing. You can know if you're the kind of person who would enjoy those experiences. Are you ready to have that kind of experience? Do you want a game that is going to give you the ability to mentally decompress? Or are you on board for the idea that there would be some time where you sort of do this thing? Again, I think if you say, well, the game is going to be boring and that will give you emotional growth, people don't jive with that. But if you were to instead translate it into its actual benefits, which are that like you get to have new thoughts, you get to experience emotions, you get to unpack yourself, that could be something that the game, I think, can claim to do. It doesn't do it all by itself, but it contains the pieces for doing that. And to say that this is a game where that is part of the appeal is fair, I think. Just that it's not something that can be kind of inherent to the game. Just like how, obviously, if a game is very easy to mod, and mods can make a very big difference, that does feel like part of the game, but we can also all agree that it's meaningful to review the game without any mods. Those are still different. It feels wrong to not give the game any credit for that. Skyrim is probably the famous example, don't you think? Or Minecraft. Modcraft is what I almost said. Classic. It feels wrong to not give these games any credit for their mod platformability. That's sort of a huge the thing about those games, I think. And yet, it also is obviously not of no value to not review them as they are as well. Those are still separate, even though it does feel related to the game. I think it's absolutely fair to include that as a sort of selling point of the game without saying then that is what the whole game rides on. I mean, the question I'm left with, and the reason I'm not getting further into this is because you put these all in a huge Google document, so I can just scroll down and see what the next parlay is, and I see the word Nier Automata in it. So the question I'm left with is, if it's part of the game, those emotional experiences, it asks something that for the player to bring, and they might not bring it. And they can never always bring it with them. The question becomes, well, what is a good vehicle for creating those experiences for the player? And the problem I have is that I feel like, yes, Death Stranding can mappably be said to create those experiences, but there are other games which I feel like have gameplay which is more entertaining when they are not creating those experiences, which exist and create those experiences. Nier Automata, for example, basically does the exact same thing, but it's just that the moment-to-moment gameplay is more. There is more things to do in it, I feel. Maybe not completely objectively. That would be interesting to analyze. Like, are the amount of decision points or like thoughts or ideas that the player is juggling objectively a larger number than the number in Death Stranding? They might not be, but I still think it's meaningful to say that there's more action. But there's not too much action that it then disrupts the player's ability to have these emotional beats in the story. Is that not just better? Because then when the player is not physically capable of having those experiences, they can have fun with them. And obviously the elephant in the room here is the player can have that experience without having listened to this nerd talk about it in Parley. The player doesn't need to know that they would enjoy those experiences. To just play and enjoy an action game that then also sets up those experiences. I don't think that Nier Automata is any transcendent or amazing thing, especially not after this series, where we broke it down in the series of practically 20 different videos. No, but I do think it's a wonderful game, and you could argue that one of its merits is that it's able to do this plus other stuff. And is that not just better, basically? Now, I'm being a little facetious. Obviously, a person who would record this type of video, I don't think it's just better. Nothing is, really. I have thoughts about that I'm saving for that next parlay, but you see what I mean. Obviously, a merit here would be, how can you make the gameplay interesting enough to hold the player's attention normally and be fun, and not, like, be a waste of time or just be boring in a mundane way, not entertaining. Moment to moment, yet still allow room for those emotional pathos moments without being like too loud or too much sensory input at once. And one way that's pretty obvious is to just modulate the amount of sensory input the game gives you. Nier Automata has many different modes. I think that's a very key thing about what can be good about the game. But you could argue that then makes the player need to enjoy more things, and you can see how you can begin to construct this. You could create a list, we've created some of it already, of the qualities that somebody would want to have, or the types of things you'd want to have known you enjoyed previously. And then if you meet those criteria, you are much more likely to enjoy this specific game. And people usually don't, but it is possible to map those things out for individual games. We have done some of it here. We could do more. That would be a fun parlay to do. For now, I'll say, well done. I think this is a really well-written parlay, and I know my way of covering it was quite chaotic, but I have a ton to say about this subject that is very near and dear to my heart, so I'm delighted that you requested it. Folks, if you'd like your own parlay like this one, you could do that using a link in the description. We'd love to have you. It's a monthly paid service where I spend a little bit of time chewing on thoughts with you. If there's something you want time for, part of the reason I made Parlay is to help create space for that. I think it's a decently reasonable price, you can decide for yourself to kind of rent some space in someone else's brain and chew on some thoughts together. So check that out if you're interested. Looking forward to the next one, Mr. Foot. And by that I mean I've already read it.